We think of gender as the body we were born with, either being male or being female. But what happens when someone doesn't identify with the body they were born into? This is called transgender. Experts say approximately 1% of the population is transgender, but lack of awareness and discrimination of transgender people keep many from reporting their real identities. In the first of a two-part series, WTIU's Taylor Killough takes us on a journey with two transgender people who are in the process of transitioning.
Every day, Kaylee Renner has to take a handful of medications.
It's those and then a finasteride, which is basically like Propecia, basically hair loss.
Kaylee is male to female transgender, so she takes biotin for healthy hair and nail growth, an anti-androgen called spironolactone, and estrogen. It's a lot of work, but she says she would rather take all these pills than the medication she used to take to treat her depression. Before she realized she was transgender, things were so bad for Kaylee that she nearly lost everything.
And it just quickly became obvious, life just kind of spiraling more out of control, about to get expelled from school and losing jobs. It's just this horrible depression. I don't want to do anything. And it's like, well, I have to, because there's just nowhere else to go.
A study published in January at the UCLA School of Law found the percent of transgender people who attempt suicide is 41%. That's nearly 10 times greater than the general population. As a social worker, Becky Bickle works with transgender people of all ages. She says suicidal ideations among transgender people can be triggered by dysphoria, the feeling of not being comfortable in your own skin.
Dysphoria is the extreme discomfort or anxiety that someone gets in relation to being misgendered or called the gender that they do not feel they identify with. Very similar to anxiety or panic for some people. In the moment, and then after a long-term expression of that, some depressive symptoms often come, some lack of motivation, not wanting to get up, often suicidal ideations will come from just constant dysphoria.
You're this entity that's kind of outside of your body, and that's not you. And so having things like a picture taken, or like being the center of attention, or up on stage doing something and just putting yourself or your body out on display feels extremely uncomfortable, and you're not quite sure why.
IU freshman Drake Eilert is transitioning from female to male.
It was very frustrating, very, of course, lonely as well, because I didn't really know anything about the LGBT community. Coming from a small town, very conservative, and especially I was raised in a conservative Christian church, it was very difficult trying to figure out what was going on and why I felt different from everybody else, why my physical body didn't seem to connect with my mind in this way.
You know, I knew that something was eating at him. You know, I really felt like he was being consumed from the inside out. And, you know, I just waited. I waited for him, you know, to be ready to talk with me.
Sheila calls it a huge relief when Drake came out to her as transgender.
To know that at least, you know, we knew what steps, you know, to give him completeness. So it was I was so thankful, really, for that day.
So what exactly does it mean to be transgender?
People who their natal sex or their biological sex do not match the sex that they identify with, and so their gender then is separate than the sex that they were given at birth.
Miranda Warden works with transgender teens at the Indiana Youth Group in Indianapolis. She says more young people question their gender than many realize.
I think more and more youth are starting to question their gender and identifying outside this kind of strict binary that society has set up for us.
The gender binary Warden refers to is the idea that everyone is strictly male or strictly female. The relatively new term genderqueer refers to someone who doesn't identify completely with either gender, but somewhere in the middle.
People ask, am I a girl or a boy? And I just say yes, or I just say no. It's like, I am both or I am neither. It's like, whatever.
The process by which transgender people become physically closer to their identity is called transitioning. Transitioning takes a lot of time and money, and the path can be long and difficult, both emotionally and physically. But Drake and Kaylee say transitioning is essential to being who they are and being truly happy.
I see what it does when I'm not transitioning and I don't have the resources. And so, because when you're transitioning, there's always the question, is this who I am? Is this what I really want to do? You know what you want the end to be, but it's genetics play a certain role in that, and it's all kind of up in the air. Your mileage may vary, and it seems very, very difficult. But difficult is okay, because difficult isn't impossible.
Last week, we met Kaylee and Drake, two young transgender people living in Indiana who are in the process of physically becoming the gender they identify with. It's called transitioning and requires years of work and tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes these services are covered by insurance, but as Taylor Killough reports in part 2 of our series, more than likely the burden falls solely on the patient.
This is a binder. It's like a double type mesh here. It's got 2 layers to help basically compress the chest a little bit more.
Drake Eilert is female to male transgender. He regularly wears a binder to compress chest tissue.
There are a lot of risks to it over time. They only recommend about 8 hours a day. Less is better. It can be physically uncomfortable for breathing. You do not want to sleep with it. If you sleep, your breathing slows down and it'll compress your chest more and can cause actual pain when you wake up.
Drake says many transgender youth, including a number of his friends, aren't out to their parents and can't afford binders on their own. So they use things such as duct tape or ACE bandages to suppress their chest tissue.
Those can actually lead to the breaking down of your ribs.
Drake has been lucky. His family supports his transition both emotionally and financially.
He's my child. It's going to bring me to tears. I'd throw myself in front of a train for my kids. I would give them, my last breath. I want him to be complete. I want him to be happy, whole. And this is who he's meant to be.
One of the first times I got to wear a tie was for my senior pictures.
When Drake told his mother the truth about who he was, the two came up with a plan. If Drake wanted to transition, Sheila wanted to make sure he did it safely. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health publishes standards of care that provide best practices for transitioning. The first step is counseling, so Drake and his mom went to Indianapolis therapist Becky Bickle.
We want to make sure that our clients are ready, that they have the coping skills they need, that they really understand what this is going to do to their body, what this is going to do for them socially, legally, all of those sorts of things. So the therapist role is just to help them think through this and make sure everyone's on the same page and understands it, so they're not doing something that's potentially not reversible.
Once the counselor establishes the patient is transgendered, they recommend them to begin hormone therapy. Drake began taking testosterone just before high school graduation. After about 1.5 years of living as his preferred gender, the next step now is top surgery, which Drake has scheduled later this month.
It's definitely, I think, freeing almost. After, I came out, I think, when I was 17, and after 17 years of keeping that inside, it was like, I can be who I am.
It's more difficult for males trying to make the transition to female. Testosterone adds masculine features to a body that can be hard to reverse. Kaylee Renner is 26 and drives a cab in Bloomington. She realized she wanted to transition 3 years ago, and she already felt like it was too late.
I feel like I'm too old. 26 doesn't seem old, but you're past puberty. Testosterone has done things to your body.
But Kaylee realized transitioning was the only way for her to beat depression.
The future is just this black, there's just nothing. It's not even there. You can't even contemplate tomorrow. But now this is something that I need to do, and I can see the end goal, and it's something I'm really striving for.
So Kaylee began the process. She sought counseling, started taking hormones, and scheduled surgeries. A major part of transitioning from male to female is facial feminization surgeries.
All of the most common surgical procedures, male to female, would be combinations of a forehead lift with a hairline advancement, hair transplants to give a more feminine hairline. As part of the brow lift, often we'll do a bony reduction of the bossing of the forehead, the full thick forehead that many men have. Then we'll usually do their eyelid surgery, feminize the nose with a rhinoplasty. Very commonly we'll put in some cheek implants, chin implants, and then do a neck lift.
Facial feminization surgeries alone can cost between $30,000 and $70,000, depending on the doctor and how many surgeries are needed. Together, top and bottom surgeries for male to female cost about $30,000, so the total cost of transition for Kaylee could be upwards of $100,000. As a young adult, Kaylee was covered under her parents' insurance plan, but her family didn't welcome the transition for many reasons.
And to them, it was this huge blow from left field. They, the old argument of, we didn't see evidence of this when you were a child, you're kind of making this up, this is a chosen lifestyle, this is not who you are.
So when Kaylee's parents found out she was using their insurance to pay for counseling, hormones, and consultations, they dropped her from the plan just days before her scheduled surgeries.
It went back to the depression I was in before, just worse, because it was so real. It was like it was about to happen, and then it was just gone.
Kaylee was left to pay for services on her own. She also no longer had access to counseling and hormones, leaving her to purchase the drugs on the black market.
You can't be sure what you're getting is the real thing, or we'll say fresh and not past its expiration date, or the sources.
For now, the one glimmer of hope Kaylee sees is the Affordable Care Act, which covers counseling and hormones if she can afford the right plan. But the Affordable Care Act doesn't cover any transgender procedures because they are still considered elective and not medically necessary.
We make thousands of choices each day: what to wear, what to eat, where to park. New research shows making too many decisions can be exhausting. But does it lead you to making bad choices? Taylor Killough reports.
Mary Ellen Dekoff spends most of her days making decisions about other people's lives. As a Monroe County Circuit Court judge, she reviews cases filed in her court and sets hearings. She decides who goes to jail and for how long.
I have a criminal docket, so I preside over cases, misdemeanors, felonies, traffic infractions. I also preside over the Monroe County Drug Treatment Court.
Each case includes dozens of factors, so some days she makes hundreds of decisions, even before lunch.
It depends upon what kind of day it is. If it's a misdemeanor pretrial day, I could hear 40 to 60 cases. If it's a felony pretrial day, I could hear probably 30 to 40 cases if they're pretrials.
A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences looked at the decisions of judges in Israel when considering parole. It found that the more decisions the judges had made, the more likely they were to keep the status quo, meaning they were less likely to grant parole. This is called decision fatigue, the idea that cognitive resources become depleted if someone makes too many decisions. And two Indiana University professors say there is plenty of scientific evidence to support the idea of decision fatigue and its potential consequences. Peter Todd and Ed Hurt are professors in psychological and brain sciences. Hurt says the point where someone is likely to experience decision fatigue depends on how they think about decision making. If someone enjoys deciding what to watch on TV, but tires of deciding what to eat, they are less likely to become fatigued while channel surfing.
It does create a situation where it becomes very difficult to maintain a certain level of expertise in the way you approach subsequent kind of tasks, and usually you see some undermining of people's performance.
The Israel Judge study also includes data on the judge's eating habits and suggests blood glucose levels may affect the decisions made, something Todd concludes in his research on food and the brain.
I present the possibility that the behavior of the judges is related to how long it's been since they've eaten. That's what the common interpretation in the press has been.
And though Judge Dieckhoff admits growing tired of making decisions,
there'll be times when my husband will say, "What do you want for dinner?" or, you know, where do you want to go for dinner? And I'll say, "I've been making decisions all day. You decide."
She says the study is oversimplified because it does not consider all the factors in a judge's decision.
For instance, you could have a case where you have 4 defendants. They could all be charged with the exact same criminal offense. You could have one at 9, one at 11, one at 1:30, one at 4. Are you going to get different sentences and results?
Dieckhoff says yes, but not because of how many decisions she's already made.
Because you're talking about 4 different individuals, 4 different criminal histories, whether or not they were victims, whether or not there were aggravating factors, mitigating factors, the age of the defendant, where the crime took place, how the crime took place.
The researchers point out decision fatigue doesn't necessarily mean making bad choices. You just may be more likely to fall back on default decisions. Todd says default decisions and decision fatigue are related and can have negative consequences when making more complicated choices.
The default decisions will happen more in situations where there's time pressure or where, for instance, you have gotten tired and don't have the necessarily the mental energy to put into thinking more deeply about the situation.
Judge Dieckhoff says she makes sure to take breaks throughout her day to stay fresh.
Although sometimes I wish I did have a crystal ball as far as being able to predict. You know, especially if you're going to put somebody on probation or let somebody out of jail, that you had a crystal ball that would say, it's fine, they'll be fine, everybody's safe, the community is safe. That would be helpful.
Researchers say there isn't one specific way to battle decision fatigue. It's different for everyone, so they advise people to be aware of when they need to take breaks and do what makes them feel most refreshed.